This podcast is sponsored by Talkspace. You know when you're really stressed or not feeling so great about your life or about yourself? Talking to someone who understands can really help. But who is that person? How do you find them? Where do you even start? Talkspace. Talkspace makes it easy to get the support you need. With Talkspace, you can go online, answer a few questions about your preferences, and be matched with a therapist. And because you'll meet your therapist online, you don't have to take time off work or arrange childcare. You'll meet on your schedule, wherever you feel most at ease. If you're depressed, stressed, struggling with a relationship, or if you want some counseling for you and your partner, or just need a little extra one-on-one support, Talkspace is here for you. Plus, Talkspace works with most major insurers, and most insured members have a $0 copay. No insurance? No problem. Now get $80 off of your first month with promo code SPACE80 when you go to Talkspace.com. Match with a licensed therapist today at Talkspace.com. Save $80 with code SPACE80 at Talkspace.com.
You want to learn about CE5 and extraterrestrial contact? Download my new book, now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, and 14 other platforms. Book authored by Donald Ledesma. CE5, Frequencies of Contact.
Alien Strand Podcast.
There was some paperwork that indicated that this was from the Zeta Reticuli star system. Now, how they obtained that, I haven't the slightest idea. But it wasn't just from the Zeta Reticuli star system. It was what they called ZR3. So it was a third planet in that star system. Is a binary star, two stars that orbit one another, and it's only visible in the southern hemisphere, and it's about 30 some odd light years away.
Alien Strand Podcast.
From ET Connections on YouTube and mountain-gate.com.
And you're listening to the Alien Strand Podcast with Donald Ledesma.
Catch us on YouTube and hit like and subscribe. We'll see you there.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Alien Strand Podcast. I'm your host, Donald Ledesma, and welcome to today's show. Yeah. It's been a while. Yeah, it has. A lot of changes are being made. I've been working on the films like always, and just kind of staying warm with this nice cold weather down here in South Texas. We finally got an Arctic blast, yes, and everybody from around the country felt that Arctic blast all the way down to the southern part of Texas and Oklahoma and even Louisiana. Oh my God, they got 10 inches of snow. You believe that? In New Orleans? How does that happen? I have no idea. But maybe it's some cloud seeding going up out there. You think? I would love to test that snow, believe me. Anyway, welcome to Alien Strand Podcast. We are on 26 to 28 platforms of your audio, and yes, for your ears, so you can hear some really cool stuff that I'm going to talk about today, right? Don't forget, watch our the films, part 1, part 2, and part 3 is on Amazon Prime. It might come off of Prime just temporarily for a few weeks, only because we're making some changes. So watch the films now as far as you can. and then we'll get part 1. I mean, we'll get part 2 and part 3 back up on Amazon Prime. It is up now, but it'll probably come down here in a few days. So I hope you guys have watched it, and I really appreciate everybody that has, right? Because it's a lot of disclosure. It's a lot of true stuff that happened to people. Yes, and that's what Alien Strand Podcast is about. And it's has a lot to do with extraterrestrials, yes, and UFOs and UAPs that we've been catching all over the skies, all over the news, and we're going to get into that as well, especially with the latest UAP find that just a whistleblower recently came out, and we're going to talk about that later in the show. But we're going to talk about him and the actual find, and then the controversies that came with it, right? And of course, we are going to have a video podcast as well that you'll be seeing on Patreon only, all right? So go visit our Patreon page, go join as a member for free at $5. You can pay the $5, be a $5 subscriber. You get a lot of free downloads. You'll be the first to hear a lot of the podcasts, and only ones to hear the podcasts that are not released to the public. So you guys get to hear it first. And I appreciate you guys if you do become a $5 a month member of Patreon, or you can join the free one as well. You'll still get some nice, good stuff. And the regular podcasts that do come out will come out on Patreon as well. All right. So, I'm talking about the video ones, right? Not the audio. Well, the audio will be on there too. But with this, that one's mainly for video and our YouTube pages and of course, our Rumble pages. So go look for Alien Strand Podcast. We actually have a Blue Sky page, brand new one as well. We just got that out as well. So we're adding to our social media because, hey, without social media, we got to get the word out of disclosure, and that's what it's about, right? Getting the word out to as many people as possible. Now, it's just one of those things that when we talk about, a lot of stories from the past, we've talked about stories that are happening now, and we never really think about the alien or extraterrestrial. I can't say alien. I'm going to just say extraterrestrial. I have changed that on these podcasts because that's what it is. It's off-world, right? Extraterrestrial means off-world, and that's what we're going to talk about. And what if these extraterrestrials had their own language, and how is it that we can interpret what they're saying or anything that they're writing about? Now, we've known about, of course, the crop circles that have we've been finding since the 1970s, 1980s, and of course, recent ones in I believe there's a video out there. You can see a crop circle being done. I believe that was a video taped in '94. I'm not sure, but I believe that's what it was. But it was in the UK, right? Somebody actually caught this happening. This gentleman out there, and he held on to the tape, and then he went to a bar and showed it to the people. They thought he was, messing around, and of course we didn't have CGI and all that good stuff back in the day. Of course, we were getting computer generated graphics, but he was just a regular guy. He wasn't nobody that knew about stuff like that. All he was a regular guy with a video camera, and he caught this crop circle being formed, and it had shapes, right? So what if these extraterrestrials were trying to speak in a language or trying to give us signals from a different star system or a different planet that we yet have found, or they're maybe leading us to a place that is out there, we just haven't figured it out yet, right? And that's part of the dialect too. I talk about dialects and things like that too, where, what if we're not interpreting things correctly, right? And just like the Sumerian text, we knew of Zecharia Sitchin, where he actually was able to decipher a lot of that, the language from the Sumer Bible or the Sumer religion or the Sumer people, right? Sumerians. And he was able to interpret a lot of the stories that came out of there, right? But they're still questioning a lot of the things that he did as far as the Sumerian text, right? Is this really deciphered correctly, or are we actually saying these words correctly in the correct dialect in the language, right? Dialect saying like a certain vowel or something different that's coming out of the way it's pronounced, right? So what if we're not doing this correctly? And how do we do that with extraterrestrial language? If they were to write us, let's just say we have a tablet of a story of something of an extraterrestrial, how do we interpret that, right? AI can do a lot of things, but it still cannot decipher a lot of things that even from our own history, our own pages of history. There's a tablet out there. It's a small tablet that they have out in Easter Island for the people that have been there for more than 1,000 years. And there's a special language that came off of that as well, to where they still cannot decipher the language that was written on a wooden tablet. Okay, and that's what I'm trying to tell you. Even AI can't figure it out. So how do we interpret, or how do we decipher any extraterrestrial language, right? And a lot of scientists and scholars and people out there have thought about that as well, as like, how do we do this in our future? Or how do we do it even from the past? Literature that has been out there, people that have said that they have extraterrestrial written dialect or dialogue, or even scripts from extraterrestrial language, right? And which are, let's just say, told to them kind of like when they speak to each other in a thought process, right? Some sort of thought process. They're able to transfer that information back and forth to each other through that thought process. And a lot of people that have gotten abducted of some sort, or even just had contact, usually get these images or flashes of images of writings in their heads, and they start writing these things out on paper. And that's about the only way that we've actually figured that out, right? Of maybe this is what the extraterrestrial language is, right? We know the story of Linda Howe, the military industrial complex. Some men from the military as well found a cave up there in Antarctica. Once they walked in, it was glowing walls, and it had petroglyphs and hieroglyphs all over the walls, glowing, right? They didn't understand the language, didn't know what it was, but they knew it was from something extraterrestrial, right? And they just didn't understand it. So how do we understand it? I don't know. And there's an article out there that has a lot to do with that as well. And this comes from a BBC article. It says, we know where to look. We know how to look. And that's what NASA chief scientist Elle Stefan said in 2015. She predicted we might find alien life within the following 10 years, which is 2025. We're here today, right? It says, today, only 2 years from the end of the date range, researchers believe they might be close to finding evidence of that extraterrestrial life might exist on far-off planets. But while there is no definitive proof yet, some scientists believe it's something we should be preparing for. Yes, and we've been preparing for that for quite some time already, since the let's just call it the alien or extraterrestrial boom, right? The UFO boom, which has been happening for the past 3-4 years now, right? I'm not going to say 5 to 6, because when I started this 6 years ago already, it wasn't as booming, right, as it is now. So past 3 years, the extraterrestrial intelligence part of it, the life that exists beyond our planets, is more than it has ever been, right? Because more videos are coming out, more people are starting to experience the extraterrestrial life, and that the proof is in the pudding, the proof is in the videos, the proof is in everything that's happening around people, that we're able to see the extraterrestrial life, and something that has came down into our atmosphere from outer space, or even from another galaxy or another universe or somewhere around space and time, they're able to jump in and out of our atmosphere, right? And we've been watching this over and over and over, especially in Mexico. Very, very hot spot there, because they are catching more spheres out there than ever before. And we've been seeing this over and over and over. And in this article it says, so what if we discover life on another planet? And if it turns out to be intelligent, how we might communicate with these cosmic neighbors? Scientists already began to ask what alien language might be like if another species could ever hope to understand each other. It says humans have a long history of bridging seamlessly impossible language barriers, right? So, in other words, we've been doing this for a long, long time, right? Because there's different languages all over the world. Researchers who decipher ancient scripts and languages use shared human habits as a reference point, right? So you got to start with that. What are their habits? And how did they live? For example, the way we might circle something important in writing helps scholars to unlock the Rosetta Stone, a decree that dates 196 BC that proved a clue in reading ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, which is the body language is also important, a tool as well. When Spanish conquistadors arrived in Americas, for example, they used hand signs and gestures to communicate with indigenous people that they met. Of course, the tragic, bloody outcome of those encounters perhaps should serve as an example of how this can be done successfully. Humans, however, are a species that have evolved to communicate with each other. Extraterrestrial beings may think and behave in a completely different way as us. Yes, I believe that as well. There's a social structure, if they have one. Could they totally unrecognizable or even unfathomable? So, how can we guess what they might be trying to say? And it's true. What if we know that the alien gray or the extraterrestrial that we have been seeing in very many photos and pictures, they have no expression in their faces, right? Very plain, very bland, very cold. Their body language is totally straight and straightforward. Show no emotions whatsoever. So how do we read that in a communicational way? And do we approach it in that same manner? That's the thing. And they try to interpret the way that the body language may be a way to communicate. And it also says, if you were to listen to Earth from outer space, you would hear about 7,100 human languages. But our planet is inhabited by creatures other than humans. Could the ways of the animals communicate with each other, telling us anything about extraterrestrial communication? Yeah, we know that animals do talk to each other in their own way. So a behavior ecologist from the University of Cambridge in the UK believes the evolutionary challenges are truly universal. And the evolutionary forces that shape life on Earth will produce many similar features in extraterrestrial life. If he is correct, it would mean life and language throughout the cosmos may share certain features. I believe that's true. we've talked about many abduction stories and how they were able to communicate with the extraterrestrials, in a telepathic way of some sort, way, shape, or form. So they do know how to communicate in that way, right? So, but we never really hear their language of who they are and how they sound and how they speak. Now, some have said that they can hear clicks and chirps coming from their mouths sometimes during an extraterrestrial abduction. And they do remember those sounds. Now, I'm sure that it is a totally different scenario of some certain type of way of thinking of how they speak and how they speak to each other. Of course, I'm sure they communicate with each other telepathically as well. And maybe some of those signs and clicks and chirps can be ways of them communicating in a more of a physical sense, right? To have those sounds. Now, we know whales communicate with the sounds as well, but they got amazing sonar, just like dolphins, right? Bats. It's a wave of sound to where they know there's a wall up ahead, and they're able to see this just with sound, right? So it's a possibility that even though these extraterrestrials can see, they're able to communicate with each other with sounds as well, because they know what to do next, right? Maybe that is a possibility of their universal language with each other. And that's what we have to figure out. And can we figure it out? I believe so. I believe we can. Let's take a quick break. Pay the bills here. We'll be back in just a minute.
Alien Strand Podcast.
All right, guys, welcome back to the show. Hope you're enjoying the content of here today. If you do, click us a like, give us a thumbs up. If you're watching YouTube, listening on any of your podcast platforms, give us a thumbs up. If you're on Spotify, show us a comment, give us a thumbs up as well on Alien Strand Podcast. We appreciate you. Also, we're talking about extraterrestrial language. And could body language be a certain way of communicating? Yeah, it's a possibility. We were talking about that as well, right? And I talked about the dolphins and the whistles and everything, the chirps that they have in order to see and communicate with each other. And these scientists are pretty much saying, hey, why can't this not be happening to them as well? We've known this, especially through Alien Strand Disclosure Project and Alien Strand, when I talk about a lot of these stories, right? A lot of my guests, every once in a while, you hear them that they will hear a sound coming from their mouths of the extraterrestrial. Not words, but sounds. So they're still trying to figure out what the language could be. And then there's the same scientist, which is Roberts, says, in my personal opinion, is that as its core, the language would have to be quite similar to ours, in the sense that a formal mathematical nature would be similar to human language, says Roberts. But at the same time, they wouldn't necessarily have anything like speech. Every human language, explains Roberts, comprises much more than just speech. We communicate through body language, movements, drumming, whistles, and more. what's really remarkable about human language is that wherever form it's carried in, it has fundamentally the same properties, he says. It's an interesting question. We have a good idea what human grammars look like. So what might alien grammars look like? Intelligent exo beings, says Roberts, might externalize our language in ways we can't even imagine. Through pheromones, magnetic fields. Who knows that? But if we could decode that language, we'd find it very similar to human language. Even if we receive a signal from outer space, wherever we would recognize it as a message in the first place would be debatable. So they're pretty much telling you that it's a possibility that their language will be the same as ours in a sense. They're just giving you the similarities of how they would pretty much talk to each other. And it's through these words and phrases that we talk. It's the same thing as signs and signals and insignias and everything that we've seen on these alien crafts, right? Even just recent, the egg-shaped UFO that they had just showed the videos of, right? And when they showed it in the cave, it actually had some kind of hieroglyphs on it, right? Of a different language. So Roberts is pretty much just saying they might just have a certain signal that has digits and sounds that would be their language, and that we would have to figure it out of what they're trying to say, right? And we've seen movies just like that. And how they always try to figure out where these things came from, how they're speaking to us, and are they coming, right? And are they on their way, or is something bigger coming? And we always wondered about the ancient cities that people always think that they were possibly built by extraterrestrials, right? And because they can't figure out why these big, massive structures were built and why they were built so massively. And of course, we talked about Easter Island, right? They did the same thing. These massive stone heads that we thought were heads until they unburied most of it and found out that it was a whole body under there, right? This massive stone. You know, the Incas had the same thing. They have some structures there in the Cusco, in Inca, right in the Peruvian Indies, right? And these stones, I don't know if you've seen these before, but they look like a jigsaw puzzle of different stones, but they're perfectly put together in these amazing shapes, right? Even curves that all line up perfectly, right? And they figured out to be about 1,000 years old if you've ever seen these. Of course, then we had the Nazca lines as well, right? You know, these large miles of geoglyph that is dug in the ground of spiders and humans and some things that look like tracks, right? So they say they have about 300 geometrical shapes or 70 figures of animals. And the best way to see this is in the sky. So why make something like this, right? And we've talked about this before. Were they trying to talk to these extraterrestrials and speak in a language they could understand, right? Which the humanistic part of us is that we're doing it through pictures, right? So why not them, extraterrestrials, do it the same way with their crop circles, right? The communication barrier is not really a big barrier. It's up to us and up to them to figure out how to communicate a little bit better and to know what they really want, right? And this is what we've been trying to do for years and years. Of course, Egyptian pyramids, we thought the same thing. First, they were 2,000 years old. Now they're 4,500 years old. They could be older as well. And these structures are huge. We've thought about Stonehenge the same way. Some of these stones are weighing just about 50 tons. That is freaking heavy, right? How do they lift 50 tons of stone like that? And that's in England. I believe that's outside of Salisbury. And that still suggests that they were trying to align those stones with a solar system of some sort, right? And they believe that Stonehenge may possibly be over 5,000 years old. This is communication with something that is above our heads and something that the human people have been trying to do for hundreds of years, even thousands of years, that we know about so far. Even the Nazca mummies, right? They just got a piece out of those. They cut one of the hands open. They found out there was flesh underneath, muscle, tissue, ligaments. Of course, not too far away, the Titocan Pyramid as well, right? In Mexico City. Huge. Which that means city of the gods, right? So they always tried to communicate with some sort of gods, even if it was, 2,000 years ago. And the language was there as well, even written on the walls of that pyramid as well. Their own hieroglyphs. They had geoglyphs as well. I've talked about Easter Island, of course, the Rapa Nui. They found over 900 of those human figures all over the place. Some of them weighing about as heavy as 14 tons. And that was the place of the language that I told you that they could not figure out the words that were written on or etched inside of that wood that they still have, which is their original language. So, how do we figure out what this language is, or how do we communicate with these extraterrestrials when it comes time? And let's just say if they do land, and let's just say they get out, and let's just say they want to communicate somehow. They give us their writings, and we have to figure it out. because their demeanors or their mentality might not be the same as us, right? The way we think. Because they might be, I'm sure they are, 100 to 1,000 times or years ahead of us. So what happens when you go to school, let's just say a history class or a math class of some sort, college, teacher asks you something, and what is to be expected? You should know, right? The instructor knows everything about that one subject, and they're going to think you should know this because they studied this all their life, and this is why they are instructing you. So, if an extraterrestrial lands, they're going to have, I believe, the same kind of mentality. You should know what I'm saying, right? They're way advanced. They know it all. And we have to figure it out. And of course, we talked about the recent egg-shaped UFO that just came out a few days ago with a whistleblower. And he talked about this egg-shaped UFO craft that they do have. And it has hieroglyphs on it of some sort, language that they don't know about. So I want you guys to listen to this real quick. And you tell me if this man is telling the truth about what happened on this whistleblower status of this new extraterrestrial craft. And when I have a video podcast, I will show you the pictures and the hieroglyphs that are on the side of this egg-shaped UFO, which is about 20 to 22 feet long. Okay? So here we go. Let's go ahead and play this.
That object, or whatever was controlling that object, was also connecting to me through the mind, through my mind.
And so, how did the object come to land?
I think it was invited to land by the psionics team.
Jake says his mission that night came from no accidental crash. The UAP was summoned by a separate team, a special team with special abilities. They're called psionics.
What is a psionic?
A psionic person is someone with the predisposition for extratemporal, you could say, abilities and sensitivities.
Extratemporal abilities, also known as psychic powers.
What did you discover the psionics were being used for in the program?
In the program, there was certainly a desire to explore the idea that perhaps UAP could be summoned, could be communicated with, could be controlled, and could be persuaded to land, all by deploying people with psionic abilities.
And did you see that happen?
Yes, I did.
When a psionic operator engages with technology, how do they do it?
Using their mind, something like meditation.
There genuinely are people who can actually make a mental, spiritual connection to a technology.
Yes, 100%.
It all seems so far-fetched. Psychically gifted humans linking with possibly alien ships, summoning them, and even piloting them. But it isn't just Jake saying this. Don Paul, another decorated Special Forces operator and colleague of Jake's, says he's also seen what psionics can do.
I've had the pleasure of meeting multiple psionic assets. I've seen them function. I know that they're capable of doing what they're doing.
You can definitively say that you believe there is a capacity in the human mind to somehow psychically, telepathically connect.
Yes, and I don't know if it's a byproduct, if it's something that they were born with, but there is certain people who are quantifiably, verifiably capable of this.
All right. So that was their interview through News Nation, and this was a big deal that came out here recently, a few days ago, and it blew up all over the internet. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Alien Strand Podcast.
All right, welcome back. As we're talking about this whistleblower and psionics, right? I've never heard that term before. This was the first time that I actually was able to understand that there is a military program out there with psionics, right? And it's very hard to look up. Believe me, I tried over and over, and which is something that's done inside of the military complex, right? Industrial complex. That is, they talked about it's used to communicate with these UFOs and can call the UFOs to them or contact the extraterrestrials, right? The same way. Now, I've spoken about this before, and I've talked about how we are like a beacon, like an antenna that can only communicate with these UFO crafts when we're doing a CE5, or maybe just having a visual one-on-one with an extraterrestrial craft, right? I've talked about it about Dorothy Zott, right? And she communicated with these extraterrestrials as well. She told it to go left, it went left. She told it to go right, it went right. So it had a direct link to her. Were these some kind of psionics that we unwillingly have, right? Or it's because the military psionics, they're training for it, right? They're training for that kind of communication. And I found something on this, and it says, apart from fighting with firearms, this is the military, an additional layer of complexity is added to the combat in a form of psionics, where aliens can harass or disrupt their foes with their minds, right? Alien psionics abilities are used to create panic. We've seen that before, right? Where they show you these awful things that are going to happen in the world, which is the bad little grays that do that. So they create panic, an attempt for mind control. And we've known that as well, because when people fall under the duress and the stress of these extraterrestrials and they have lost total control of their own bodies, because these extraterrestrials know how to manipulate your mind and shut you down, right? And I believe that's a form of psionic. So I believe they have figured out a way to use that as well against them, which is against the extraterrestrial, or to call the UFO. With the capture and interrogation of aliens capable of psionics, we'll also be able to use psionics against the aliens. To learn how to use and counter psionics, or how a way to screen a soldier for psionics, right? So, and it's a big mind control. So they call it molecular control. They do have a psionic laboratory. They have something called the Psi-Amp as well, which is the disruptor. The mind probe is the mind control reader, right? The molecular control. We'll just say it that way, reader. So there's 4 sections of psionics, right? Well, there's molecular control AB, molecular control reader and molecular control disruptor, right? So they have separated all these into different areas to know that these extraterrestrials, how to get in their minds as they get in yours, right? So if the military is that far in psionics, how is it that we're just barely finding this out now? Well, because of the whistleblower. We didn't know anything about this. Now these mind control and the data that's out there is starting to trickle its way out into the World Wide Web. And this is how we start to figure out how these extraterrestrials work against the human body, as we can use their own way, which is a weapon, I would say, of some sort, against them as well, right? But why look at it as a terroristic threat or some sort of bad thing, right? Why not use it as a good thing to communicate? And the communication with the extraterrestrial language, right? Which is maybe through sign language as well. What we talked about earlier in this podcast. And if we could understand them and they can understand us, we were able to capture and retrieve one of their extraterrestrial craft. Now, this whistleblower said that they use psionics to bring this extraterrestrial craft down to them to where they can retrieve this craft and do research on it. From Antarctica. This is exactly where it came from. And when I saw the hieroglyphics on the side of this UAP, egg-shaped craft, you could barely see the hieroglyphs on it, but they were there. A language or something that I have never seen before, or could interpret it with anything that I've seen before with different languages, right? It just looked completely different. So I'm sure they know by now, which is Big Brother, Industrial Complex, of how to read those hieroglyphs. And I will show them on a podcast coming up on Patreon and on YouTube. And I hope you catch up with that podcast to learn a little bit more about that UAP. At first, when it first came out, there was a lot of doubt out there. Even for myself, I fell into that web. And I was convinced that it was not real. Until that video, which coincided with the video that we saw, which he released to News Nation, was the same craft that was in that video. And it came from the dark web. That was released to the public. So what he said made sense. And it was released by an unknown. So now we know that we are closer to the truth, that he was telling the truth. That UAP was real. And it did have hieroglyphs on it. And well, someday that we'll learn how to read it. If we don't know already. And I always say this, if I could only be a fly on the wall. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of you do as well. But eventually, little by little, all this information is starting to trickle out. And I believe we will find the answers to everything. But right now, it's just a big waiting game. We'll just have to wait for it. All right, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast today. Alien Strand Podcast. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up. Right on. If you're listening to us on Spotify, leave some comments there. Give us some thumbs up there. Share it. Share it to as many people as possible. You hear it on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Deezer, Amazon. You can even ask Alexa to play some Alien Strand Podcast. Yes, she will. Or he, or whatever you want to say. But thank you guys for listening to today's show. I believe it was an important one. You'll be catching some more audio podcasts as they do come out. All right. So, it's been my absolute pleasure to giving you this information as much as possible. Don't forget, go to our Patreon page and click on this little thing at the very bottom of the section where it's going to say all my links. Click on that. Look for our Patreon page and look for all our social media pages there as well. All right. There's some sponsors on there as well. Go check those out. We have America's Coffee. We have Snack Bitch 85. Go look at those stores. Really appreciate it. Amazing sponsors out there for Alien Strand Podcast. Remember, I'm going to have some authors going to be coming up on the show as well. I have 2 of them. So I'll be getting ready for those. I'm reading their books as we speak. I still have another one that I'm still reading his book, but we're going to get at least 3 authors on here, and, they want to talk about spiritualism, things like that, all right? But until then, I hope you guys, like I said, enjoyed today's podcast. Follow us on many social platforms, social media, Patreon, everywhere, YouTube. Go look for us. We're out there, all right? But until then, you guys have yourselves a good day. Have yourselves a good evening. And have yourselves a good night.
Alien Strand Podcast.
You want to learn about CE5 and extraterrestrial contact? Download my new book, now on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple, and 14 other platforms. Book authored by Donald Ledesma. CE5, Frequencies of Contact.